The Hopi have a teaching about what lies beneath the Grand Canyon. It says this world isn't the first one, that people came up into it from a world below through an opening in the canyon country called the Seapu. And in the teachings kept by the Bear Clan, the people who made that journey didn't make it alone. They were sheltered along the way, underground, by beings the Bear Clan calls the Ant People. The Hopi have carried that teaching for centuries. They carry it now. Then, in April of 1909, a newspaper in Phoenix ran a story about something underneath the same canyon. An explorer had found a passage cut into a cliff face high above the Colorado River. Behind it, according to the paper, was a tunnel running deep into the rock, opening into chambers on either side. Grain still sitting in storage, copper tools, statues, writing on the walls nobody could read, and in one chamber, the dead, prepared and laid out in rows. Nothing in that story has ever been confirmed. No object from it has ever been shown to anyone. But there it is, two accounts of a world beneath the same canyon, arriving from places that could hardly be further apart. One carried by a people across generations, one printed in a newspaper on a spring morning in 1909. So what's actually behind them? Start with the older one. Start there because it is older, and because whatever the newspaper was, this didn't come from it. The Hopi are a people of northern Arizona. This is their country, and they live in it today. Their teachings describe earlier worlds and how the people emerged from the previous world into this one. The Seapu is the opening they came through. It's a real place in this canyon country, and for the Hopi, it's a sacred one. These aren't stories about a cave. They're an account of where people came from and what they owe for having arrived. They belong to particular clans who keep them and pass them on by speech. The Bear Clan holds the part that matters here. It teaches that when one world ended and the next began, the people were taken in and sheltered underground, and it calls the ones who did that the Ant People. However you understand that teaching, one thing about it isn't in question. It's old. Older than the state of Arizona, older than any written description of this canyon by anyone who came here from somewhere else, which is what makes 1909 worth looking at properly. That account arrives from a completely different direction, and it arrives late. The story ran in the Arizona Gazette on the 5th of April, and it was not vague. It named the man who found the place, G.E. Kincaid. It had him traveling the Colorado, spotting something in the cliff face high above the water and climbing up to it. What he found, the paper said, was a passage cut into the rock by hand, running a long way back before it opened out. Then it told you what was in there. Granaries with the seeds still in them. Copper tools, hardened by some method the article said couldn't be accounted for. Pottery, statues, inscriptions nobody present could read. And human remains, prepared and laid in rows. And it named somebody else. A Professor S.A. Jordan said to be running the excavation for the Smithsonian Institution. That's a great deal to put in print. A named man, a named professor, a named institution, and rooms full of objects you could carry out and set down on a table in front of people. Whatever else you make of that story, it doesn't leave itself much room. Something like that should be findable, so people went looking. The first thing they found was that the Gazette wasn't finished with it. 4 days later, on the 9th, the paper came back to the story. It didn't correct anything. It didn't hedge. It gave the story more room. Whatever was going on at the Arizona Gazette that week, the paper was not backing away from what it had printed. And then it stopped. Completely. No excavation report, no list of finds, no photographs. Nothing in the weeks that followed or the year that followed. A discovery the paper had called one of the most important ever made in the American Southwest left the record within days of entering it, which leaves the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian has been asked about this a great many times. It has no record of employing G.E. Kincaid. It has no record of a Professor S.A. Jordan. It has no record of an expedition to a cave in the Grand Canyon, and no record of a single object that came out of one. That's not a thin file. There's no file. But it isn't a hiding place either. There's nothing in there to hide. It doesn't support the story, and it isn't suppressing it. It's worth knowing why the Smithsonian's name was in that article at all. 3 years earlier, the Antiquities Act had put antiquities on federal land under federal protection, and the Smithsonian had become a routine partner in government archaeology. Naming it was a way of making the story official, which is exactly why finding nothing in that institution's own files matters as much as it does. And it's worth knowing what American newspapers were like in 1909. They printed real discoveries and invented sensations, sometimes on the same page, and they didn't always give a reader any way to tell the difference. For most historians who have examined the article, this is where the evidence points toward fabrication. On the documentary record, that's a reasonable place to land. Except there's one more thing to check, and it isn't in an archive. People sometimes throw the story out on the grounds that a cave that size couldn't stay hidden in the Grand Canyon, that the place is flown over and photographed and walked through by millions of people, and something like that would have turned up by now. That objection is wrong. The Redwall limestone runs for hundreds of miles through these canyon walls, and it's riddled with caves. Some open in cliff faces hundreds of feet above the river, and the only way to reach them is to climb. Plenty have never been surveyed. Some are simply out of reach, so the canyon can hide a large cave. It's hiding them right now. And this is exactly where the story tends to get away from people. A limestone cave is a hole made by water. The Redwall tells us there are openings in this canyon nobody has ever looked into. It tells us nothing at all about what's inside them. An unexplored cave is not a granary. It isn't an inscription, and it isn't a room full of the dead. So the geology tells us that a large hidden cave is possible. It doesn't tell us that the complex described in 1909 ever existed. Which brings it back to the Hopi and to what they actually hold about a world beneath this canyon. This, that there were worlds before this one, that people came up out of the last of them through the Seapu, which is here in this canyon country, and which is sacred. And in the Bear Clan's teachings that they were sheltered underground on the way by the Ant people. It's an account of origin and of survival, and of what people owe for having got here. It belongs to a living tradition, and the Hopi are still living it. It was never a description of the place the Arizona Gazette wrote about, and it was never offered as one. As for the Gazette, what that newspaper establishes is one thing, and it's worth being exact. On the 5th and the 9th of April, 1909, a newspaper printed these claims. That's the whole of it. Everything inside those articles is reported, none of it was verified then, and none of it has been verified since. Put the two accounts side by side, and here's what you get. Both describe a world under the same canyon, nothing links them. There's no evidence either one influenced the other, and no evidence they're describing the same place. Hopi teaching doesn't become archaeology because a newspaper printed something set underground, and the newspaper doesn't become credible because Hopi teaching is old. They're different kinds of testimony, and neither one can vouch for the other. It may only mean that this is a canyon full of dark openings and high walls, and that anyone who stands here long enough starts wondering what's behind them. What stays unknown is most of it. Whether Kincaid existed as described, what the writer was working from, why no artifact ever appeared, whether papers once existed and were lost, why a newspaper that expanded the story on the 9th of April never mentioned it again. Nothing in the record closes any of that. But two things can be said with confidence, and they aren't the same thing at all. There are caves in the Grand Canyon, large ones, unmapped ones, some nobody has ever reached. That's established, and it's a fact about water and limestone. The complex the Arizona Gazette described is another matter entirely. Nothing establishes it. No object, no report, no photograph, no file. More than a century on, there's still nothing there. So the mystery holds, and it's worth being clear about what kind of mystery it is. Two accounts describe a world beneath the same canyon, and nothing in the record connects them. That resemblance is genuinely interesting, but on its own, it isn't evidence of a connection. None of that solves anything. It does something narrower. It shows you where the knowing stops and why it stops there. That line is the whole of what the evidence permits. Everything past it is a story about a canyon, and so far the canyon hasn't confirmed any of them.